The last pie sat on the edge of the wooden table like a forgotten prayer, its golden crust catching the amber light of the late December afternoon in Sierra City, California. And Diana Lawson wondered if she had made a terrible mistake coming to the winter fair at all. She had spent the entire morning watching other women sell their baked goods, their preserves, their handcrafted items, while her apple pie remained untouched despite being the best thing she had ever made. The crust was perfect, flaky and golden, the filling sweetened with just the right amount of cinnamon and sugar from the precious stores she had carefully rationed. But it was 1876, and she was new to this mining town, a widow at 23 with no family name to recommend her, no husband to give her standing, and apparently no customers willing to take a chance on a stranger's cooking. The fair was winding down now. Other vendors had already begun packing up their wares, counting their earnings, laughing with neighbors they had known for years. Deanna stood alone behind her table, her worn brown dress doing little to keep out the December chill that swept down from the Sierra Nevada mountains. Her fingers were numb despite the thin gloves she wore, and her pride was even more bruised than her cold, reddened hands. She had been in Sierra City for only 3 weeks, having traveled from Missouri after her husband, Thomas, died in a logging accident. They had been married barely a year, and his death had left her with nothing but debts, and the realization that his family blamed her for encouraging him to take dangerous work. She had sold everything she owned to buy a stagecoach ticket west, drawn by stories of opportunity in the gold mining towns of California. What she found instead was a rough settlement where single women were either saloon girls or wives, and she fit into neither category comfortably. The boarding house where she rented a small room took most of her remaining money. She had been doing laundry and mending for the miners, but it barely covered her expenses. The winter fair had seemed like a chance to make some extra money, maybe even establish herself as someone who could bake and cook for special occasions. She had spent her last few dollars on the ingredients for 3 pies, selling 2 earlier in the day for standard prices. This last one, her masterpiece, she had priced higher, hoping someone would recognize the quality. Instead, it had sat here for hours, a testament to her foolish optimism. "Packing up soon," called Mrs. Henderson, the butcher's wife, from the next table over. Her tone was not unkind, but there was a smugness to it that made Diana's jaw tighten. Mrs. Henderson had sold out of her goods before noon. "Soon," Deanna replied, forcing a smile. She would not give these women the satisfaction of seeing her defeated, even though defeat was exactly what she felt pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy yoke. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the snow-capped mountains in shades of pink and gold. The fair was held in the town square, such as it was, really just a widening in the main street where the general store, saloon, and assay office formed a rough triangle. Most of the miners had already disappeared into the saloon, their weekly wages burning holes in their pockets. The few families who lived in town were heading home to warm fires and hot suppers. Deanna was just reaching for the cloth to cover her pie when she heard the jingle of spurs and the heavy tread of boots on the frozen ground. She looked up to see a man approaching her table, and something in her chest tightened with an emotion she could not immediately name. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his sheepskin coat. His hat was pulled low, but she could see dark hair curling at his collar and a few days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw. What caught her attention most, though, were his eyes. They were a striking blue-gray, the color of storm clouds, and they held a loneliness that she recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. "That pie for sale." His voice was deep and rough, as though he did not use it often. Yes, Deanna said, then cleared her throat when the word came out as barely a whisper. Yes, it is. It is apple made fresh this morning. I am asking 75 cents. That was high for a pie, she knew. The standard price was 25 cents, maybe 35 for something special. But this pie was worth it, and she was tired of undervaluing her own work. The man stepped closer, and she caught the scent of leather, wood smoke, and something else, maybe pine. He looked down at the pie with an expression she could not read, then up at her with those storm cloud eyes. I will give you $2.25, he said. Deanna blinked, certain she had misheard. I am sorry, what? $2.25, triple what you are asking. He was already reaching into his coat pocket, pulling out coins that glinted in the fading light. It is the last one, and I figure it must be special if it is still here. Either that, or these folks do not know quality when they see it. Her pride bristled slightly at the implication that her pie had not sold because of the townspeople's ignorance. But then he was placing the coins on her table, and she was staring at more money than she had made all week doing laundry. That is too much, she heard herself say, even as her fingers itched to take the money. It is just a pie. Nothing made with care is just anything, he said simply. He picked up the pie, handling it carefully as though it were made of glass rather than crust and apples. Then he looked at her again, and this time there was something almost shy in his expression, a vulnerability that did not match his rough appearance. What is your name? The question surprised her. In 3 weeks in Sierra City, people had called her Miss, or Madam, or the widow when they thought she could not hear. No one had asked her name directly, as though learning it would create an obligation they were not willing to take on. Deanna, she said, and then, because she was still a widow and that mattered in a place like this, Deanna Lawson. Deanna, he repeated, and the way he said it, careful and deliberate, made her name sound like something precious. That is a fine name, like the Roman goddess of the hunt. She stared at him, startled. Most of the men in Sierra City could barely write their own names, much less reference classical mythology. You know your Roman gods. My mother was a teacher back in Boston before she married my father and they headed west. She made sure I learned to read and appreciate learning, even if I chose a life that did not require much of either. He shifted the pie carefully to one arm and tipped his hat with his free hand. I am Declan Zane. Most folks just call me Zane. Mr. Zane, Deanna said, and then, because he had been kind to her when no one else had, why did you pay so much? Really? Declan Zane was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving past her to the mountains beyond, then back to her face. Because I know what it is like to feel invisible in a place where everyone else seems to belong. And because sometimes a small kindness can mean the difference between keeping going and giving up entirely. I figured you might need the kindness today. The words hit her like a physical blow, not painful but powerful, knocking something loose in her chest that she had been holding tight and defensive for weeks. Months, really, since Thomas died. Maybe longer than that. Thank you, she managed, her voice thick. That is very kind. He nodded, then seemed to hesitate, as though weighing whether to say something more. Finally, he spoke again. If you are looking for more work, the mining camp where I work could use someone who can cook. The food there is barely fit for eating and the men would pay well for decent meals. It is hard work, and the conditions are rough, but the money is honest. Diana's mind raced. Cooking for a mining camp would be exhausting, probably dangerous given the type of men who worked in such places, but it would also be steady income. Real income, not the pennies she made from mending and laundry. Which camp? She asked. The Northern Star, about 2 miles north of town. I am the foreman there, so I can vouch for you if you are interested. We could set you up in the cookhouse, give you a room attached to it so you would not have to travel back and forth. The pay would be $20 a week, plus board. $20 a week. Deanna's room at the boarding house cost her $3 a week, and she had been struggling to make even that much. $20 a week with room included was more money than she had ever had at one time. Why are you offering this to me? You do not even know if I can cook more than a pie. Anyone who can make a pie that looks like this can cook, Declan said. And like I said, I know what it is like to feel alone in a place that does not want you. I figure we all need someone to give us a chance sometimes. There was something in his voice, a loneliness that matched her own that made her want to ask him 100 questions. Why was he alone? Where did he come from? What brought him to this harsh place? But those were not questions for a first meeting, especially not when he was offering her a lifeline she desperately needed. When would I start? She asked. Tomorrow, if you are willing. I can come by with a wagon in the morning to help you move your things. It was too fast, too sudden, but Diana thought of her dwindling funds, the cold looks from the townswomen, the loneliness of her small room. She thought of Declan Zane's storm cloud eyes and the way he had paid triple for her pie without blinking. She thought of the kindness in his voice when he said he knew what it felt like to be invisible. Tomorrow morning, she agreed. I am staying at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house on 3rd Street. I know it, Declan said. He touched his hat again in farewell. I will be there at 8. And Miss Lawson, Deanna, thank you. The men at the camp will be grateful for some decent food, and I will be grateful for the company of someone who seems like they might understand what it means to be far from home. He turned and walked away before she could respond, his long strides carrying him quickly down the street until he disappeared around the corner near the saloon. Deanna stood there for a long moment, the coins on her table gleaming in the last light of the day, wondering what she had just agreed to and whether Declan Zane was her salvation or just another complication in an already complicated life. She gathered the coins carefully, wrapping them in her handkerchief and tucking them deep in her pocket. Then she folded her tablecloth, collected her empty pie tins, and walked back to the boarding house through the gathering darkness. Sierra City was not a large town, barely more than a few hundred people, most of them men working the gold claims in the surrounding mountains. The streets were frozen mud, rutted and treacherous, and the buildings were mostly rough-hewn wood, unpainted and functional. It was not beautiful, but it was the only home she had now. Mrs. Patterson was in the kitchen when Deanna entered through the back door, and the older woman looked up from her cooking with a raised eyebrow. I heard you did not sell much at the fair, she said without preamble. Mrs. Patterson was not a cruel woman, but she was practical to the point of bluntness. I hope you have next week's rent ready. I cannot keep giving you extensions, not with winter here. I have it, Deanna said, pulling out her handkerchief and counting out the required coins. She had enough now, thanks to Declan Zane, and even a little extra. And I will not need the room after tomorrow. I have found work at a mining camp. Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted from stern to disapproving. A mining camp is no place for a respectable widow. Those men are rough, and the work will be backbreaking. You would be better off finding another husband, settling down properly. Deanna bit back the sharp response that rose to her lips. She had tried being a proper wife, and it had left her alone and penniless in a strange place. She was done living her life according to other people's ideas of what she should be. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Patterson, but I have made up my mind. I will be gone by morning. She did not wait for a response, just headed up the narrow stairs to her room. It was small, barely large enough for a bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. But it had been hers, and she felt a pang of uncertainty as she looked around it. Was she making a mistake? Trusting a stranger, moving to a mining camp where she would be the only woman among dozens of men? But then she thought of Declan's eyes, the loneliness there, the understanding. She thought of his words about kindness and feeling invisible. And she thought of the alternative, staying in Sierra City, scraping by, always on the edge of destitution, always alone. She slept poorly that night, waking several times to the sound of drunken miners stumbling past on the street below. Each time, she lay in the darkness wondering if she was being brave or foolish, and never quite settling on an answer. Morning came cold and gray, with a wind that promised snow. Deanna packed her few belongings quickly. 2 dresses, undergarments, her sewing kit, the small Bible that had been her mother's, and the daguerreotype of her and Thomas on their wedding day. She looked at the image for a long moment, at their young, hopeful faces, and felt the familiar ache of loss. Thomas had been a good man, if not particularly ambitious or careful. She had cared for him, maybe even loved him in a quiet way, but theirs had been a practical marriage, not a passionate one. She wrapped the daguerreotype carefully and placed it at the bottom of her trunk. At precisely 8 o'clock, she heard the rattle of wagon wheels outside. She looked out her window to see Declan Zane sitting on the seat of a sturdy freight wagon, 2 horses stamping in the cold. He was looking up at the boarding house with an expression she could not read from this distance. Deanna hurried downstairs, hauling her trunk with effort. Declan met her at the door, taking the trunk from her hands as though it weighed nothing. "Good morning," he said. His voice was still rough with disuse, but there was something warmer in it today, less guarded. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I will ever be," Deanna admitted. He loaded her trunk into the wagon bed, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of a man who did hard physical labor, but his touch was gentle. Deanna settled onto the seat, arranging her skirts, very aware of how close they were sitting. The wagon seat was built for practicality, not propriety, and their shoulders nearly touched. Declan clicked his tongue at the horses and they started forward, their breath steaming in the cold air. For a while, they rode in silence, leaving Sierra City behind and following a rough track that led north into the mountains. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh way. Pine trees heavy with snow, granite peaks piercing a gray sky, and everywhere the sense of vast, indifferent wilderness. "How long have you been in California?" Deanna asked finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. 5 years, Declan said. "I came in 71, thinking I would strike it rich like everyone else. Instead, I learned that the real money is not in finding gold, it is in the steady work of getting it out of the ground. I worked my way up from mucker to foreman. It is hard work, but it is honest, and I am good at it. Do you like it?" He considered the question seriously, his eyes on the trail ahead. "I like the challenge of it, figuring out how to work a claim efficiently, keeping the men safe. I like being out here in the mountains, away from cities and crowds, but it is lonely work. Most of the miners are transient, staying a season or 2 before moving on to the next big strike. It is hard to make real friends when everyone is just passing through." Diana understood that feeling all too well. "Where is your family? You said your mother was from Boston." "Was," Declan confirmed, and his voice went flat. "She died of cholera when I was 17. My father followed her 2 years later. Grief mostly, though the official cause was heart failure. I had a sister, but she married a banker and moved to San Francisco. We write occasionally, but we were never close. She thinks I am wasting my life out here." "Are you?" He glanced at her, surprised by the directness of the question. "I do not think so. I make a decent living, I am my own man, and I do work that matters. Maybe it is not glamorous, but it is mine." That has to count for something. It counts for a great deal, Deanna said quietly. I think being true to yourself is worth more than living up to someone else's expectations. Is that what you are doing? Being true to yourself? The question was gentle, not accusing, but it still made Deanna pause. Was she being true to herself? She barely knew who she was anymore. She had been a daughter, then a wife, then a widow, always defined by her relationship to others. This move, taking this job, it was the first thing she had done purely for herself in a long time. I am trying to be, she said finally. I am trying to figure out who I am when I am not just surviving. Declan nodded slowly as though this made perfect sense to him. That is a good answer. An honest one. They crested a rise, and the Northern Star mining camp came into view below them. It was larger than Diana had expected, a collection of rough buildings spread across a cleared area in the forest. There was a long, low structure that was clearly the bunkhouse, a smaller building that she guessed was the office, and various sheds and equipment shelters. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and she could hear the distant sounds of men working, the clang of metal on rock, the rumble of voices. The cookhouse is that building there, Declan said, pointing to a sturdy structure near the center of camp. It has a good stove, better than what most camps have. The previous cook left it in decent shape before he headed off to Virginia City. Your room is attached, small but private. You will have your own entrance, and I will make sure the men know to respect that. Diana felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach as they descended toward the camp. She could see men now, stopping their work to watch the wagon approach. There were dozens of them, maybe 40 or 50, all of them staring at her with open curiosity. She lifted her chin, refusing to show fear even though her heart was racing. Declan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cookhouse and jumped down, then came around to help Deanna descend. As her feet touched the ground, a group of men began to approach, their expressions ranging from curious to suspicious. Men, Declan said, his voice carrying authority that immediately silenced the murmuring. This is Miss Deanna Lawson. She will be our new cook starting today. I expect every one of you to treat her with respect and courtesy. Any man who causes her trouble will answer to me personally, and then he will be looking for work elsewhere. Is that understood? There was a chorus of agreement, some enthusiastic, some grudging. A weathered man with a gray beard stepped forward, his eyes kind. Welcome, Miss Lawson, he said. I am Jack Murphy, been working this claim longer than most. I speak for the men when I say we are grateful to have someone who can actually cook. The last fellow meant well, but his idea of seasoning was to burn everything black. A few men laughed, and the tension eased slightly. Deanna smiled, finding her courage. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I will do my best to keep everyone fed and happy. I hope you all like apple pie because that is my specialty. Apple pie. A younger man's eyes lit up. Madam, I have not had apple pie in 2 years. You make us apple pie and you will have friends for life. More laughter, and Deanna felt the knot in her stomach begin to loosen. These men were rough, yes, and probably starved for female company, but they did not seem threatening. They seemed, mostly, like lonely men far from home, grateful for any touch of domesticity in their hard lives. Declan showed her into the cookhouse, which was better than she had expected. The stove was indeed good, a large cast iron model with multiple cooking surfaces and an oven. There were sturdy work tables, shelves stocked with basic supplies, and hooks for pots and pans. The room attached to it was small, as promised, but it had a real bed with a thick mattress, a chest of drawers, and even a small mirror on the wall. There was a window that looked out over the forest and a solid door with a lock on the inside. Will this do? Declan asked, and there was something anxious in his voice as though her answer mattered more than it should. "It is perfect," Deanna said honestly. "Thank you, Mr. Zane, for all of this, for the opportunity." "Declan," he said. "Just Declan, please. We are not formal out here." "Then you should call me Deanna." He smiled for the first time since she had met him, and it transformed his face entirely. The loneliness receded, and she saw humor there, warmth, and something that made her heart skip in an unfamiliar way. "Deanna it is," he said. "I will let you get settled. Supper is usually around 6, but the men will be grateful for food whenever you can manage it today. If you need anything, my cabin is the small one behind the office. Do not hesitate to ask." After he left, Deanna stood in the middle of her new kitchen and took a deep breath. This was home now, at least for the foreseeable future. It was not what she had imagined her life would become, but then, nothing about the past year had been what she imagined. She might as well make the best of it. She spent the rest of the morning taking stock of the supplies and planning her first meal. There was salt pork, beans, flour, lard, dried fruit, and various other staples. Not fancy ingredients, but enough to make something substantial and filling. She decided on a hearty stew with biscuits and dried apple cobbler for dessert. Nothing too ambitious for her first day, but enough to show what she could do. As she worked, men occasionally passed by the window, always slowing to look in with curiosity. She ignored them, focusing on her tasks. The stove heated well once she got it going, and the kitchen had a pleasant warmth that spread into her small room. For the first time since arriving in California, Deanna felt something like peace settle over her. By 6 o'clock, she had the food ready. She rang the bell that hung outside the cookhouse door, and men came streaming in from all directions, their faces eager. They lined up with tin plates, and Deanna served each one, ladling generous portions of stew and handing out hot biscuits. The men's thanks were profuse, almost embarrassing in their enthusiasm. Declan came in last, after all his men were served. He took his plate with a quiet thanks and was about to leave when Deanna stopped him. "You do not eat with your men. I usually eat in my cabin. Keep some distance, makes it easier to maintain authority." "That sounds lonely," Deanna said before she could stop herself. Declan looked at her for a long moment. "It is," he admitted, "but it is part of the job." "Well, if you ever want company while you eat, you are welcome to sit at the work table in here. I will be eating there myself, since the bunkhouse is no place for me." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or pleasure. "I might take you up on that, thank you." He left, but Deanna caught herself smiling as she dished up her own supper. She sat at the work table, eating her stew and listening to the sounds of the men in the bunkhouse, their voices carrying through the evening air. They sounded happy, or at least content, and she felt a swell of pride. She had done this. She had made these hard, lonely men a little more comfortable, and there was satisfaction in that. The days fell into a rhythm quickly. Deanna rose before dawn to start breakfast, fed the men, cleaned up, started preparations for dinner, fed the men again, cleaned up, and then began supper. It was exhausting work, but it was also satisfying in a way that mending clothes and washing laundry had never been. She was creating something, making something from raw ingredients that brought genuine pleasure to people. The men's appreciation never waned, and many of them went out of their way to help her, hauling water, chopping wood for the stove, or bringing her fresh game when hunting was good. Declan became a regular presence in her kitchen. He started taking his meals at her work table, at first in silence, then gradually opening up. She learned that he was 29, that he had tried his hand at various trades before finding his calling in mining, that he loved to read and often ordered books from San Francisco when he could. He learned that she was from a small town in Missouri, that she had married Thomas mostly because it was expected, and because she liked him well enough, that she had always dreamed of seeing more of the world than the narrow confines of her hometown. "You miss him?" Declan asked one evening about 2 weeks after she had arrived. They were lingering over coffee, the supper dishes washed and put away, the camp quiet around them. "Your husband?" Diana considered the question honestly. "I miss having a companion, someone to talk to at the end of the day. I miss feeling like I belong somewhere with someone. But do I miss Thomas specifically? I am not sure. That sounds terrible, does it not? He has been dead less than 6 months, and I am already uncertain if I miss him." "It does not sound terrible," Declan said. "It sounds honest. Not every marriage is a great love story. Some are just two people trying to get through life together. There is nothing wrong with that, but there is also nothing wrong with admitting it was not more than it was." "Have you ever been married?" Deanna asked. "No. Came close once when I was 23. Her name was Catherine, and she was the daughter of a mine owner in Colorado. We were engaged, had the wedding planned and everything. Then her father looked into my background, discovered my family had no money, no connections, nothing to offer. He convinced her to break it off. She married a lawyer instead, someone who could give her the life her father thought she deserved. That must have hurt. It did for a long time, but looking back, I think her father did me a favor. Catherine wanted a certain kind of life, one I could never have given her even if her father had approved. We would have made each other miserable eventually. Better to know that before the wedding than after." Deanna wanted to say that Catherine was a fool to let him go, that any woman would be lucky to have someone as steady and kind as Declan Zane, but that felt too forward, too revealing of her own growing feelings. Because she was developing feelings, she could not deny that. She looked forward to the times when Declan sat at her table, when they talked about everything and nothing, when she saw him smile at something she said. She found herself thinking about him when she was alone, wondering what he was doing, if he was safe when he went down into the mine. She noticed things about him. The way he always made sure his men were cared for before himself, the patience he showed when explaining something to a new worker, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was genuinely amused. It was dangerous to feel this way, Deanna knew. She was his employee, dependent on him for her livelihood and her safety. If she let her feelings show and he did not reciprocate, she would be in an impossible position. But knowing something was dangerous did not make the feelings go away. Christmas came, and Deanna made a feast for the men. Roasted venison that one of the miners had brought her, potatoes, biscuits, gravy, and 3 apple pies. The men were boisterous and grateful, and several of them produced harmonicas and a battered fiddle for an impromptu celebration. They sang songs, some beautiful and some bawdy, and the sound of their voices filled the camp with unexpected joy. Declan appeared at her door as the celebration was winding down, a small wrapped package in his hands. "I got you something," he said, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have something for Christmas." Diana's throat tightened. She had not expected gifts, had not gotten anything for anyone else. "You did not have to do that. I wanted to." She unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a beautiful leather-bound journal and a good pen. The journal was the nicest thing she had ever owned, the leather soft and smooth under her fingers. "I thought you might like to write down your recipes," Declan said. "And maybe your thoughts if you wanted. Everyone should have a place to put their thoughts, I think." Diana looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. It was such a thoughtful gift, so perfectly suited to her, and the fact that he had been thinking about what she might want moved her more than any expensive present could have. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is beautiful. I will treasure it." "You are welcome." He hesitated, then added, "You have made this place feel different, Deanna. Better. The men are happier, better behaved, and I think it is because they have something to come back to at the end of a hard day. You have given them a piece of home out here. You have given me that too, and I wanted you to know I am grateful." Before she could respond, he touched his hat and left, disappearing into the snowy darkness. Deanna stood in her doorway, clutching the journal to her chest, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break free. The winter deepened, bringing heavy snows that sometimes isolated the camp for days at a time. Deanna learned to plan carefully, to stretch supplies when the supply wagons could not get through. The men grumbled about the cold and the long nights, but the cookhouse remained a warm refuge, and Diana's meals a highlight of their difficult days. On a particularly cold January night, disaster struck. Deanna was awakened by shouting and the sound of running feet. She threw on her coat and rushed outside to find chaos. A section of the mine had collapsed, trapping 3 men inside. Declan was organizing a rescue effort, his face grim in the torchlight. Men were grabbing shovels, ropes, timber for shoring, moving with desperate efficiency. Deanna felt helpless, useless, until Jack Murphy appeared at her elbow. "Miss Lawson, we are going to need hot coffee, lots of it, and food that the men can eat quickly. This is going to be a long night." Deanna sprang into action, grateful for something useful to do. She got the stove roaring, brewed pot after pot of strong coffee, and made sandwiches from leftover roast and bread. She carried supplies out to the mine entrance, where men were working in shifts, digging frantically into the collapsed tunnel. Declan was down in the tunnel himself, directing the work, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. Every time Deanna saw him emerge, covered in dirt and sweat despite the freezing temperatures, her heart clenched with fear. The mine could collapse further at any moment, trapping him along with the men they were trying to save. Hours passed. The false dawn lightened the sky, then the sun rose properly, and still they dug. Deanna kept the coffee coming and the food, and refused to let herself think about what it would mean if they did not reach the trapped men in time. Finally, near midday, a shout went up. They had broken through. Deanna held her breath as men began emerging from the tunnel, supporting 3 injured but alive miners. They were bruised, bloodied, and one had a broken leg, but they were alive. Declan was the last to emerge, and Diana's breath caught at the sight of him. He was filthy, exhausted, and there was blood on his shirt from a gash on his arm that he had apparently not noticed or did not care about. "Get those men to the bunkhouse," he ordered. "Murphy, ride to town and fetch the doctor. Everyone else, I want that tunnel shored up properly before anyone goes back down. We will not work again until I am satisfied it is safe." The men moved to obey, and Declan swayed slightly on his feet. Deanna was at his side in an instant, taking his uninjured arm. "You need to sit down," she said firmly, "and let me look at that arm." "I am fine," he protested, but he let her lead him to the cookhouse. Inside, she pushed him into a chair and began carefully cutting away his shirt sleeve to reveal the gash beneath. It was not as bad as she had feared, but it needed cleaning and bandaging. "This is going to hurt," she warned, then poured whiskey over the wound. Declan hissed in pain but did not pull away. Deanna worked quickly, cleaning the cut and wrapping it tightly with clean strips of cloth. "You could have been killed down there," she said, and her voice shook despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "The tunnel could have collapsed further at any moment. Those men needed help. I could not leave them down there. And what about the people who need you? What about your responsibility to stay safe so you can keep this camp running? What about me?" she wanted to say but did not dare. Declan looked up at her, his storm cloud eyes intense. Were you worried about me, Deanna? The question was soft, almost wondering, and Deanna could not lie. Yes. I was terrified every time you went back into that tunnel. I kept thinking about what it would mean if you did not come out. What would it mean? Diana's hand stilled on the bandage. This was dangerous ground, but she was too tired and too frightened to be cautious anymore. It would mean losing someone I have come to care about very much. Someone who has become important to me. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. Then Declan reached up with his good hand and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "You are important to me too," he said quietly. "More important than you probably should be. You are my employee, and I should not be thinking about you the way I do, but I cannot seem to help it. From the moment I saw you at that winter fair, standing so proud and alone behind your table, I felt drawn to you. I told myself it was just kindness, just giving someone a chance who needed one, but it was more than that. It has been more than that from the beginning." Deanna's heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am tired of being lonely. I am tired of keeping everyone at a distance because it is easier that way. I am saying that when I was down in that tunnel, wondering if the whole thing was going to come down on my head, the thought that kept me going was that I wanted to see you again. I wanted to sit at your table and drink your coffee and listen to you talk about whatever was on your mind. I wanted more time with you, Deanna. As much time as I could get." "Declan," she whispered, and then she could not say anything else because he was standing, pulling her gently into his arms, and she was leaning into his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other, and Diana felt something inside her click into place, like a piece of a puzzle she had not known was missing. This was what she had been searching for without realizing it, this feeling of safety, of belonging, of being seen and valued for who she truly was. "I should not be doing this," Declan murmured into her hair. "You work for me. If this makes you uncomfortable, if you want me to leave, I will, and nothing will change between us professionally. I promise you that." Deanna pulled back enough to look up at him. "And if I do not want you to leave, if I want this as much as you seem to?" His eyes searched hers, looking for certainty. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he smiled, that same transformative smile she had seen before. And then he was lowering his head, and she was rising on her toes to meet him, and they were kissing. It was not a practiced kiss, not smooth or expert. It was hesitant at first, then deeper, then urgent with all the loneliness and longing they had both been carrying. Deanna's hands fisted in Declan's shirt, pulling him closer, and his arms tightened around her, holding her as though she was something precious he was afraid to lose. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Declan rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right, Deanna. You deserve that. You deserve someone who will treat you with respect and patience, someone who will value you the way you should be valued." "I want that too," Deanna said. "But Declan, I need you to know that I am not the same person I was when I was married to Thomas. That marriage taught me that I do not want to be someone's obligation or convenience. If we do this, I need it to be real. I need to know that you want me, not just any woman who happens to be here." "I want you," Declan said with such conviction that Diana felt tears sting her eyes. "Not just any woman. You, your strength, your pride, the way you never gave up even when you had every reason to. The way you made a home here in the middle of nowhere, made all of us feel less alone. I want you, Deanna Lawson, and I will spend however long it takes proving that to you." They spent the rest of that day together when they could steal moments between their responsibilities. Declan needed to oversee the shoring up of the tunnel, check on the injured men, and make sure the camp was secure. Diana needed to feed everyone and tend to the injured miners until the doctor could arrive from town. But they kept finding excuses to be near each other, their eyes meeting across the camp, small smiles exchanged like secret promises. The doctor arrived that evening, an elderly man named Harrison who had seen every kind of mining injury imaginable. He pronounced the trapped miners lucky to be alive and set the broken leg with practiced efficiency. He also scolded Declan for not having his arm looked at sooner, added more stitches to Deanna's bandaging, and gave them both a knowing look that made Deanna blush. "You two have the look of people who have finally figured out what has been obvious to everyone else for weeks," Dr. Harrison said dryly. "About time, I say. Nothing like a near-death experience to make people admit their feelings." Over the following weeks, Declan courted Diana with a determination that was both endearing and overwhelming. He brought her wildflowers that he found on his rare trips away from the camp, even though it was winter and he had to search far to find anything blooming. He ordered special supplies for her kitchen when the supply wagons came through, things she had mentioned wanting in passing that he had remembered. He read to her in the evenings from his small collection of books, his deep voice turning poetry into something magical. Most importantly, he talked to her. He told her about his dreams of maybe owning his own mine one day, of building something that would last. He told her about his fears that he was not good enough, not educated enough, not refined enough for someone like her. Deanna listened to all of it and told him her own dreams and fears in return. Her hope that she could save enough money to maybe open a restaurant someday. Her fear that she would always be defined by being a widow first and herself second. Her growing certainty that she was falling in love with him. "You are falling in love with me," Declan repeated when she said it, his voice full of wonder. They were sitting on the bench outside the cookhouse, watching the stars emerge in the clear, cold sky. It was late March now, and the worst of winter was finally loosening its grip. "I think I have been falling for a while," Deanna admitted. "Maybe since that first day when you paid triple for my pie and asked my name. Maybe even before that, when you looked at me like I was someone worth seeing." Declan took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "I am falling in love with you too. Fell in love, actually. Past tense. I love you, Deanna. I know it has not been that long, and maybe I should wait longer to say it, but I have learned that life is too short and too uncertain to waste time on what I should or should not do. I love you, and I want a future with you if you will have me." Deanna turned to look at him, this strong, lonely man who had given her a chance when no one else would, who had seen her at her lowest and offered kindness instead of judgment. She thought about the life they could build together, the home they could make even in this rough place, and her heart felt full enough to burst. "I love you too," she said. "And yes, I want a future with you. Whatever that looks like, wherever it is, I want to be with you." Declan kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he was smiling that smile that transformed his face. "Marry me," he said. It was not quite a question, more a statement of inevitable fact. "I know we should probably wait longer, do this more conventionally, but I am tired of waiting. I am tired of being without you even when you are right here. Marry me, Deanna." "Yes," Deanna said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in Sierra City a week later, in a simple ceremony at the small church with Jack Murphy and Mrs. Henderson as witnesses. Diana wore a new dress that Declan had ordered specially from Sacramento, pale blue wool that made her eyes look bright. Declan wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional, but when Declan said, "I do," and slipped a plain gold band on her finger, Diana felt the weight of it like a promise kept. This was different from her first marriage. This was choosing and being chosen, loving and being loved, seeing and being seen completely. The miners threw them a raucous celebration back at the camp, with food Diana had prepared in advance and whiskey that appeared from mysterious sources. There was music and dancing, and the men took turns offering toasts that ranged from heartfelt to ribald. Through it all, Declan kept Diana close, his hand in hers, his eyes never leaving her face for long. When the celebration finally wound down and they retreated to Declan's cabin, which would now be their home, Diana felt a flutter of nervousness. Her first wedding night had been awkward and disappointing, Thomas fumbling and apologetic, both of them too uncomfortable to really enjoy it. She hoped this would be different but was not certain. Declan seemed to sense her anxiety. He took her hands, kissing each one gently. "We do not have to do anything tonight," he said. "We have all the time in the world now. I just want to hold you if that is all right, just be with you." But Diana discovered she wanted more than that. She wanted to feel close to him, to complete the promises they had made. She reached up and kissed him, putting into the kiss all the love and desire she felt, and Declan responded with gratifying enthusiasm. They came together slowly, carefully, with gentleness and growing passion, and it was everything Diana had not known to hope for. This was what it should be like, she realized. This mutual giving and taking, this joy in each other's pleasure, this profound intimacy that went beyond just physical connection. Afterward, lying in Declan's arms in the darkness, Diana felt a peace she had never experienced before. She was home, truly home, not in a place but in a person. She had found where she belonged. The spring brought changes to the camp. The mine's yield was improving, and Declan began talking about expanding operations. He asked Diana what she thought about every decision, valuing her opinion in a way that still surprised her. They had settled into married life easily, working together during the day and spending their evenings in quiet companionship, talking or reading or simply being near each other. In May, Diana realized she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable: the morning sickness, the exhaustion, the tender breasts. She was not sure how she felt about it. A baby would change everything, would make her vulnerable in ways she had not been since coming west. But when she told Declan, his face lit up with such pure joy that her own doubts dissolved. "A baby," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby. Diana, you have made me the happiest man alive." "You are happy about this?" she asked, needing to hear him say it clearly. "Happy? I am beyond happy. I am going to be a father. We are going to be a family. How could I be anything but thrilled?" His enthusiasm was infectious, and Diana found herself getting excited despite her nervousness. They began planning for the baby's arrival, fixing up a corner of their cabin as a nursery, ordering supplies from San Francisco. The miners were delighted by the news, already making plans for gifts and offers of help. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was oppressive, and Diana's morning sickness lasted well into her second trimester. But Declan was endlessly patient and supportive, taking over some of her duties in the cookhouse when she was too tired, sitting with her when she was sick, rubbing her feet when they swelled. "I love you even more now," he told her one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "I did not think that was possible, but seeing you growing our child, seeing your strength through all of this, it makes me love you more every day." Diana leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders, her hand on her swelling belly. "I love you too, so much. Sometimes I think about how different my life would be if you had not bought my pie that day, and it terrifies me. I might have given up, might have gone back to Missouri and married someone I did not love just to survive. Instead, I have this life, this love, this future. You gave me all of that. You gave it to yourself, Declan said firmly. You were brave enough to take a chance, to trust a stranger, to build a new life. All I did was recognize something special when I saw it. Their son was born in early January, during a snowstorm that trapped everyone in the camp for 3 days. Dr. Harrison had come to stay at the camp in anticipation of the birth. And it was lucky he did, because the labor was long and difficult. Deanna labored for nearly 20 hours, with Declan holding her hand through all of it, never leaving her side despite the doctor's suggestion that he wait elsewhere. When the baby finally arrived, tiny and red and wailing, Declan wept openly. "A son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a son, Deanna." They named him Daniel after Declan's father, and he was perfect. Dark-haired like both his parents, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. The miners were enchanted with him, taking turns holding him with surprising gentleness for such rough men, offering to carve him toys or sew him clothes. Diana had never been happier or more exhausted. The baby demanded constant attention, and she was still trying to manage the cookhouse with help from some of the miners who had volunteered to learn basic cooking. Declan did everything he could to help, walking the floor with Daniel when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, simply being present in a way that Thomas never had been during their brief marriage. "You are a wonderful father," Deanna told him one night, watching him rock their son to sleep with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "I am just doing what any father should do," Declan replied. "Taking care of the people I love. There is nothing wonderful about it, it is just right." But it was wonderful to Deanna, who had not had much experience with men who took their family responsibilities seriously. Her own father had been distant, her husband well-meaning but ineffectual. Declan was different. He was fully engaged, fully committed, and it made her love him more than she had thought possible. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, the mine continued to prosper. Declan's careful management and the rich vein they were working made the Northern Star one of the most successful claims in the area. He began talking about buying the mine outright from the company that owned it, about building a proper house in Sierra City where they could raise their family more comfortably. "Would you want that?" he asked Deanna one evening. Daniel was asleep in his crib and they were enjoying a rare moment of peace. To move to town, live in a real house instead of this cabin, Deanna considered. She had come to love the camp, rough as it was. She had made a home here, had learned who she was in this place. But she was also practical, and she knew that as Daniel grew, he would need more than what the camp could offer. He would need school, friends his own age, opportunities. "If it is what is best for our family, then yes," she said. "But I want to keep cooking for the men if we do move. They have become like family to me, and I would miss them." "We could work something out," Declan assured her. "Maybe hire someone to work in the cookhouse during the week, and you could come up on weekends. Or we could open that restaurant you once talked about in Sierra City. The miners would come to town to eat there, I am sure of it." The idea of a restaurant appealed to Deanna more than she expected. She had discovered that she loved cooking not just for sustenance, but as a creative outlet. She had begun experimenting with different recipes, drawing on memories of her mother's cooking and things she had learned from the various people she had met. A restaurant would allow her to do more of that, to create a real business of her own. They spent months planning and saving. Declan successfully negotiated to buy the Northern Star mine, becoming one of the few owner-operators in the area. The purchase took most of their savings, but it was an investment in their future. With ownership came more profit, and within a year, they had enough to buy a house in Sierra City and begin renovating a storefront for Diana's restaurant. The house was modest by city standards, but luxurious compared to the cabin they had been living in. It had 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a parlor, and even indoor plumbing, a recent innovation that Diana appreciated more than she could express. Daniel was 2.5 by the time they moved in, energetic and curious, exploring every corner of his new home with delighted enthusiasm. Diana's restaurant opened in the spring of 1879. She called it The Hearth, hoping to evoke the warmth and comfort of home. The menu was simple, hearty, well-prepared food at reasonable prices. Miners came down from the camps, families from town, even travelers passing through. Diana had not anticipated how satisfying it would be to see people enjoying her food, to create a gathering place for the community. Declan helped when he could, though running the mine kept him busy. He hired a new foreman so he could spend more time in town with Diana and Daniel, and he never missed a family supper if he could help it. They had settled into a comfortable rhythm, their life full but manageable, their love deepening with each passing year. In the summer of 1880, Diana discovered she was pregnant again. She was more prepared this time, more confident, though no less tired. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in March of 1881 she gave birth to a daughter they named Delia. Where Daniel had been a demanding baby, Delia was calm and easy, sleeping through the night within weeks and rarely fussing. "We have been blessed," Declan said, holding his daughter with the same wonder he had shown when Daniel was born. 2 healthy children, a good business, a home. "I never imagined I could be this happy, Diana." "Neither did I," Diana admitted. She thought back to that winter day at the fair, standing alone with her unsold pie, feeling invisible and hopeless. How different her life was now. How much had changed because one lonely cowboy had paid triple and asked her name. The years passed in a blur of busy, joyful chaos. The restaurant thrived, becoming a local institution. The mine continued to produce, though like all mines, they knew it would eventually play out. Daniel started school, showing his father's love of books and his mother's stubborn determination. Delia grew into a bright, affectionate child who charmed everyone she met. Declan and Diana's love never became comfortable or taken for granted. They still found time for each other despite the demands of children and businesses. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and passion in equal measure. The loneliness that had defined both their lives before they met never fully returned, held at bay by the family they had built together. In 1885, when Daniel was 8 and Delia 4, they decided to have a formal photograph taken, the first since their wedding. They dressed in their best clothes and went to the photographer's studio in Sierra City. Diana looked at Declan in his suit, his children on either side of him, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had created. "What are you thinking?" Declan asked, noticing her expression. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Diana said. "How different everything could have been. How grateful I am that you saw me that day, really saw me, when I felt like I had disappeared entirely." Declan took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her wedding ring. "I am the lucky one. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to come back at the end of every day. You took my loneliness and turned it into belonging. I will never stop being grateful for that, Diana. Never." The photograph captured them looking at each other instead of at the camera, their love evident in their expressions, their children between them, a family complete and content. The years continued to unfold. The mine eventually did play out, but by then, Declan had diversified, investing in other businesses, including Diana's restaurant and a freight company that transported goods between the mining camps and Sacramento. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that neither had been in their early lives. Daniel grew into a thoughtful young man who loved engineering and talked about building railroads. Delia showed her mother's talent for cooking and her father's head for business, already helping in the restaurant by the time she was 10. They had more children, another son named David and a daughter named Deanne, rounding out their family to 4 children total. Through it all, Declan and Deanna remained each other's anchors. They weathered the normal challenges of marriage and family, disagreements about money, worries about the children, the exhaustion of running businesses and raising a family. But they faced everything together, always remembering what it had been like to be alone, always appreciating what they had found in each other. On a winter evening in 1895, nearly 20 years after that winter fair, Deanna and Declan sat on the porch of their house watching the snow fall. Their children were inside, the older ones helping the younger ones with schoolwork, the house filled with the warm sounds of family life. Deanna leaned against her husband, and he wrapped his arm around her, both of them content in companionable silence. "Do you ever think about that day at the fair?" Deanna asked. "When you bought my last pie?" "All the time," Declan admitted. "I think about how close I came to not going, to heading back to camp instead. I almost missed you entirely. The thought terrifies me even now." "I think about that too. About how desperate I felt, how alone. And then there you were, this stranger willing to pay triple for a pie and ask my name. You changed my entire life in that moment." "We changed each other's lives," Declan corrected gently. "You were exactly what I needed, even though I did not know I needed it. You taught me that being alone was not the same as being safe, that opening my heart was worth the risk. Every day with you has been worth it, Deanna. Every single day." Deanna turned to kiss him, their lips meeting with the ease of long familiarity but still with a spark of the passion that had drawn them together. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Every single day," Deanna echoed, "and all the days to come." They sat together as the snow continued to fall, blanketing Sierra City in white, the lights from their windows spilling out into the gathering darkness. Inside, their children laughed at something, the sound carrying through the evening air. This was home, Deanna thought. This was family. This was the life she had built from nothing, starting with one unsold pie and a lonely cowboy who saw her when she felt invisible. As the years progressed into the new century, their life continued to evolve, but remained grounded in the love they shared. The restaurant passed to Delia, who expanded it and made it even more successful. Daniel did indeed become an engineer, working on the railroad projects that were connecting California more fully to the rest of the country. David took over management of the freight company, and Diane became a teacher, following in the footsteps of her grandmother whom she had never met. Declan retired from active mining work, but remained a respected figure in the community, consulted on business matters and known for his fairness and integrity. Diana continued to develop new recipes and mentor young women who wanted to learn cooking as a trade. Together, they watched their children marry and have children of their own, filling their house with grandchildren who brought new joy and chaos into their lives. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp and their love never wavering. They still took walks together when weather permitted, still talked for hours, still reached for each other in the night. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper and more sustaining, a love built on decades of shared experiences, of weathering storms together, of choosing each other every single day. On a spring morning in 1910, Declan woke to find Deanna watching him with a soft smile. "Good morning," she said. "I was just thinking about us, about everything we have built together. Good thoughts, I hope. The best thoughts. I was thinking about how we started with so little and ended up with so much. Not money, though we have been comfortable. But family, love, a life that matters. We did that together, Declan. We created something beautiful from loneliness and hope." Declan took her hand, pressing it to his lips. "We certainly did, and I would not change a single moment of it, even the hard parts. It all led us here, to this life, to this morning, to still being together after all these years. How many years has it been now? 33 since we married. 34 since I bought that pie and asked your name." Deanna laughed, the sound still bright and joyful despite the years. "Best $2.25 you ever spent. Best decision I ever made," Declan agreed. "Asking your name, I mean, the money was nothing. Learning who you were, that was everything." They lay together in the morning light, hands clasped. Two people who had found each other when both were lost and built a life together that neither could have imagined. Outside, they could hear their youngest grandchildren playing in the yard, their mother, Deanne, calling them in for breakfast. The smell of coffee drifted up from the kitchen where one of their daughters-in-law was already starting the day. This was legacy, Deanna thought. Not just the children and grandchildren, not just the businesses and the house and the material things. The real legacy was the love they had built, the family they had created, the example they had set of what a true partnership could be. They had shown their children and grandchildren that love was a choice you made every day, that it was worth fighting for, worth working for, worth treasuring. "I love you," Deanna said, the words as meaningful now as they had been the first time she said them all those years ago. "I will always love you, Declan Zane." "And I love you, Deanna Lawson Zane," Declan replied. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." That is how it has always been with us, our love growing deeper with every passing day. They rose eventually, joining their family for breakfast, surrounded by the noise and warmth of the life they had built. There would be more years ahead, more challenges and joys, more moments of quiet contentment and boisterous celebration. But the foundation was solid, built on that moment 34 years ago when a lonely cowboy paid triple for a pie and asked the name of the woman who made it. That simple act of kindness, that willingness to see someone who felt invisible, had changed two lives completely. It had created a family, a legacy, a love story that would be told by their grandchildren and great-grandchildren for generations to come. It had proven that sometimes the most important moments in life are the smallest ones, the ones where we choose to reach out, to connect, to offer compassion to someone who needs it. Deanna and Declan lived many more years together, never spending a night apart unless absolutely necessary, never taking for granted the miracle of having found each other. They watched the world change around them, saw the Wild West they had known transform into something more settled and civilized. They saw automobiles replace horses, electricity light homes that had once relied on oil lamps, airplanes take to the skies. Through all the changes, their love remained constant, an anchor in an ever-shifting world. When Declan finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, Diana was holding his hand, as she had been for most of their married life. Her grief was profound but not bitter. They had been given 50 years together, 5 decades of love and partnership and family. She had been blessed beyond measure, and she knew it. Diana lived another 5 years after Declan's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, continuing to share her recipes and stories. She spoke often of that winter fair, of the last unsold pie, of the lonely cowboy who had changed her life. She wanted her descendants to understand that love could come from the most unexpected places, that kindness mattered, that being brave enough to start over could lead to happiness beyond imagining. When she passed away at 86, her family found the journal Declan had given her that first Christmas. It was filled with recipes, yes, but also with thoughts and memories, a record of their life together written in her careful hand. On the first page she had written, "This is the story of how I was lost and then found, of how loneliness became belonging, of how one act of kindness changed everything. This is the story of love, real and lasting and true." Her grandchildren kept the journal, passing it down through the generations, along with the story of the winter fair and the pie and the cowboy who paid triple just to ask a name. It became family legend, a reminder that the most important things in life often come from the smallest gestures, and that love, when it is real, can transform everything. The restaurant Diana started continued for another 50 years, run by her descendants, a testament to her skill and vision. The house where they raised their family still stood in Sierra City, now a historical landmark. But the real legacy was in the family itself, in the values Deanna and Declan had instilled in their children and grandchildren: kindness, integrity, hard work, and above all, love. Two lonely people had found each other in the winter of 1876, in a rough mining town in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They had built a life together through hard work, mutual respect, and deep, abiding love. They had created a family that would remember them for generations. And it all started because one man was willing to pay triple for a pie and ask the baker her name. It was a simple story, really. But then, the best love stories often are. They are not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. They are about seeing someone, really seeing them when they feel invisible. They are about offering kindness when it is needed most. They are about choosing love every single day, through good times and bad, through challenges and triumphs. Deanna Lawson and Declan Zane had lived that kind of love story. They had proved that two broken, lonely people could heal each other, build something beautiful together, and create a legacy that would outlast them both. Their story began with an unsold pie at a winter fair, and ended decades later with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who knew themselves to be loved because they came from love. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy anyone can leave. Not wealth or fame, but the proof that love, when it is genuine and true and worked for every single day, can transform lives and echo through generations. Deanna and Declan's love story did exactly that. It started in loneliness and ended in belonging, and every moment in between was worth treasuring.